Breaking news to bring you. Julian Assange, we're just hearing, has been sentenced to 50 weeks in jail for breaking his bail conditions. He could have got a maximum of 52 weeks, so he's got very nearly the maximum sentence there for breaching his bail conditions. 50 weeks in jail. The 47-year-old co-founder of WikiLeaks spent 7 years avoiding court by staying in the Ecuadorian embassy in London, but he was removed from there last month, and he's been in court at Southwark Crown Court this morning. Let's just take you, well, this is actually a picture of him going into court this morning, holding up his fist in an apparent gesture of defiance as he arrived to hear his sentencing for breaching his bail conditions. And as I'm saying, we've just heard that it is 50 weeks in jail, just short of a year. There are lots of reporters gathered outside the court. There are also Julian Assange supporters outside the court. We could hear them shouting a little bit earlier as the court hearing was underway. He was found guilty of breaching the Bail Act at a hearing at Westminster Magistrates Court earlier this month after he was arrested at the Ecuadorian embassy. He went into the Ecuadorian embassy after being accused of sexual offences in Sweden in 2010, and after he had exhausted the legal options against an extradition order, he went to the Ecuadorian embassy in 2012 to seek sanctuary, and that is where he remained until he left and was arrested at the embassy last month. And I've got a letter actually that I can read out to you, an extract from, that was read to the court, in which Julian Assange said, "I apologise unreservedly to those who consider that I have disrespected them by the way I pursued my case. I found myself struggling with difficult circumstances. I did what I thought at the time was the best, or perhaps the only thing that I could have done. I regret the course that has taken." And the letter goes on to say those difficulties were compounded and also impacted upon very many others. Let's go to our correspondent Andy Moore, who's at Southwark Crown Court. Andy, tell us more about this sentence.
Yes, so the sentence was of 50 weeks, so that was very near the maximum sentence of 1 year that could have been imposed for this offence. You can hear Julian Assange's protesters, supporters outside court. There were those shouts of "shame on you" as Mr Assange was sentenced to that 50 weeks. Now, it was quite a long proceeding. Mr Assange arrived at court early this morning. His beard had been trimmed and he gave a clenched fist to supporters as he was driven into court. He was asked if he understood in court what the proceedings were about, and he said he didn't understand the details, but he understood he would be, this was a case that would commit him to prison. He was wearing a jacket over a grey jumper and jeans. So the prosecution were fairly short in saying this should be treated as an A1 case, a very serious case of skipping bail. Then we had quite a long speech from Mark Summers. He was the QC for Julian Assange in mitigation. He said that Mr Assange was in fear for his life. He felt that he would be extradited to Guantanamo Bay, to the States, that he might possibly be tortured there. So that is why Mark Summers said Mr Assange had gone to the Ecuadorian embassy for asylum. We heard a little bit about Mr Assange's medical condition. There was a report, doctor's report from 2017 that was quoted that said Mr Assange was depressed and suffering from depression. And the defence in mitigation said this should be taken as a moderate case of skipping bail, that there shouldn't be that ultimate 1 year long sentence. But the judge dismissed, frankly, most of those arguments. She said this was near the upper limit of seriousness to her. She said this was a case where nobody was above or beyond the rule of law. She said, this is Judge Taylor, this was a deliberate attempt to avoid justice, and so she sentenced him to 50 weeks in jail, and he will get some time off for about the 3 weeks he's already spent in jail. But Julian Assange going to jail, or sentenced to jail, for nearly a year.
That obviously is over issues around his bail conditions for breaching them. What about the other issues that he's facing? He's wanted in the United States. The US has requested his extradition, and he's also facing allegations in Sweden.
That's right. This is one legal case against Julian Assange. He'll actually be appearing before a different court, Westminster Magistrates Court, tomorrow via video link. And this is in connection with the extradition case. I mean, the judge made the case today, emphasising to the defence this was nothing about extradition. So tomorrow he'll appear before video link. And this is in connection with the American authorities who want him on a case of trying to break into the US defence system, trying to break their password. It's alleged that he was acting in conjunction with Chelsea Manning, formerly Bradley Manning. That was the soldier who gave a whole cache of secrets to WikiLeaks back in 2010. And Julian Assange faces up to 5 years in an American prison if he's convicted of that. Tomorrow it's likely to be a procedural case before Westminster Magistrates. The extradition proceedings themselves could last several years. The Swedish case, going back to why Julian Assange skipped bail in the first place, was because he was accused of rape and sexual assault in Sweden. The Swedish prosecutors have stayed the rape case for the time being. They said when he was arrested 3 weeks ago that they would go back and look at it again. Certainly the woman who alleges rape wants it revived. The Swedish authorities say they will look at it, have a think about it, and then tell the world what they have decided. 3 weeks have passed and we've got no decision yet from the Swedish authorities.
OK, thank you very much indeed, Andy, for updating us. Lots of activity there behind Andy, where Julian Assange has been sentenced to 50 weeks in jail for breaching his bail conditions.
Julian Assange has been sentenced to 50 weeks in prison for breaching his bail. The WikiLeaks co-founder, who's 47, spent 7 years avoiding court by staying in the Ecuadorian embassy in London, but he was removed from there last month. Our correspondent Andy Moore is at Southwark Crown Court with the latest. And what did the judge have to say to him?
Well, the judge listened to the arguments in mitigation put forward by Mark Summers, QC, for Julian Assange. He said that Julian Assange had gone into the embassy because he feared being extradited to Sweden and from there to the United States, where he feared for his life. He said that Julian Assange had suffered illness, he was depressed, and that this was all in mitigation and that he shouldn't be given the maximum sentence. But the judge listened to that and then basically threw it out. The maximum sentence was 52 weeks, 1 year in jail. She actually sentenced him to 50 weeks. The judge, Deborah Taylor, said this was a deliberate attempt to avoid justice. She said nobody was above and beyond the law. She said this was one of the most serious cases, really, of breaching bail. Now, outside court, supporters of Julian Assange within the last half hour or so said this sentencing was an outrage, it was vindictive, they said. They said, for example, the speedboat killer who went to Georgia to jump bail, he was only sentenced, they said, to 6 months in jail. So these proceedings over and done with now, the sentencing over and done with. Tomorrow Julian Assange will be appearing in court again via video link, and this is in connection with the extradition proceedings to the United States, where he could face a jail sentence there of up to 5 years.
Andy Moore, thank you very much.